Breaking news out of South Korea today. In a surprise late-night address, the South Korean president declared martial law, calling the move necessary to protect the country from communist forces in North Korea. But within hours of South Korea's parliament voted to lift the declaration, declaring that martial law was invalid. Joining us now with more details is the Hill's White House reporter, Brett Samuels. Brett, thanks so much for joining us. So let's start with this South Korean martial law. What exactly do we know? It's the first time in 45 years it's been declared in the country. What do we know, and how's the U.S. responding?
Yeah, so this came as a surprise to the U.S. You know, they had no heads up that this was going to happen. As you mentioned, the president of South Korea declared martial law. He spoke about, anti-government forces, concerns about, folks who were against his government, essentially. So he declared martial law, which of course related to, cracking down on striking workers, cracking down on dissent. It also related to some media activity. And as you mentioned, the parliament voted to invalidate this martial law. So we're waiting to see now, whether the president actually goes for it and lifts martial law or what happens next. But President Biden's been briefed on this. The U.S. is monitoring it, but certainly I think there is some level of concern about what's happening in South Korea.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely something to keep an eye on. Another topic, something that broke over the weekend, the House COVID report led by a Republican committee had released a report. This has been long running. They've been working on this report for a while now. Give us the key takeaways from that body of work.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it was in the works for a couple of years now. Republicans have really kind of made this a sort of pet project of theirs. But one big focus was on this idea, this conclusion that the coronavirus originally was the result of likely a lab accident or lab leak. This was something that Republicans have spent a long time kind of pushing this theory that it was, not just something that came out of a wet market or something like that, that it was actually a lab leak. So that's one of the takeaways, is that was the likeliest scenario. Other takeaways included, pushing back on some of the early mitigation efforts. Obviously, in 2020, when this was all starting, there was a lot of pushing for mask mandates, social distancing, keeping 6 feet of distance. So this report is sort of critical of some of those pushes and sort of questions the effectiveness of some of those measures. And then another focus is on sort of how the National Institutes of Health, how it oversees its grant programs, how it holds accountable places like the Institute of Virology in Wuhan in China, what it maybe needs to do better to make sure that it's being more proactive about who it's giving its money to and how it's overseeing those grants.
Folks will be studying that period of U.S. history for many years to come. Let's turn now to the Trump transition. Pete Hegseth, Trump's pick for Pentagon chief, was on Capitol Hill yesterday, continuing those meetings with senators. Now, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding Hegseth about a 2017 allegation involving sexual assault. Then there was more reporting from the New Yorker. Tell us what the latest is with Pete Hegseth's nomination, and can we glean anything from how those conversations went with senators yesterday? Because if all Democrats vote no, which is expected, Hegseth can only afford to lose 3 of those Republican senators.
Yes, as you mentioned, there's been sort of this steady drip of additional reporting on top of that original sort of police report about that previous sexual assault allegation. We saw the New Yorker, which reported on some of Pete Hegseth's alleged conduct when he was leading these veterans groups, these nonprofit groups, some allegations that he was drinking on the job, that he needed to be, carried out of events, and that he was making inflammatory comments or, more misconduct essentially on the job. So more of this is coming out. The New York Times reported on a message that Pete Hegseth's mom wrote to him several years ago, essentially criticizing his treatment of women.
Very emotional letter.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly when it comes from his mom, that carries some weight. Now she has said, she's said that she has made peace with him, that she took it back, that she doesn't still stand by those beliefs, which Republicans have pointed out. But, as you said, what really matters is whether he can win over enough Republicans to get his confirmation through. Now, it does seem like Republicans are somewhat open, certainly, to his nomination in ways that maybe they aren't for some other nominees, or maybe they're more skeptical of other nominees. Pete Hegseth doesn't have Republicans, putting out immediate no's. They seem certainly to be keeping an open mind. He's won over the folks you might expect, the Trump allies in the Senate, Marsha Blackburn, Bill Hagerty, folks like that. But certainly bears watching whether some of those key senators like Susan Collins, like Lisa Murkowski, like Mitch McConnell even, whether they give sort of their stamp of approval here.
Yeah, and if that confirmation hearing does end up happening in the Senate early next year, it's going to be an interesting back and forth conversation between Hegseth and those senators. Let's turn to two other nominees. Elise Stefanik, Trump's pick to be U.S. ambassador to the UN, and also Pam Bondi, his second pick to be Attorney General after Matt Gaetz withdrew his name from consideration. Far less controversial picks, but they were on Capitol Hill yesterday meeting with senators. Do we expect it to be a pretty smooth sailing for those two?
I think for Elise Stefanik, definitely. I would be shocked if there are many, if any, GOP defections. She might even win over some Democrats. John Fetterman, an example of a Democrat who has sort of spoken about how he's open to supporting some of these Trump nominees. So Elise Stefanik, even though maybe she doesn't have a lot of diplomatic experience, does seem to be somebody who is going to have a solid relationship with these senators and sort of pass through the confirmation process. Pam Bondi, another one who I think she is a much safer pick than Matt Gaetz was, certainly, to say the least. Republican senators are not, running for the hills or clamoring for a different pick. So again, that's one where I'm not sure if she'll get Democratic support because there are some concerns, I think, about how Trump might try to wield the Justice Department against some of his opponents, but Republicans at least seem to be on board with the Pam Bondi pick, and these meetings are kind of reflective of that, I think.
Just need 50. Just need 50 with that tiebreaker. Another one of these nominees, Kash Patel, President-elect Trump announcing over the weekend that he wants Kash Patel to lead the FBI. Kash Patel has a very controversial background with some things he has said, but also his nomination effectively means that Christopher Wray, the current FBI director, would be fired. He's got 3 more years in his 10-year term. He's up in 2027. What are we hearing about Kash Patel's nomination? Because this was his senator's return to Washington yesterday for the first time since Kash Patel was nominated, and there was a lot of discussion about his pick.
Absolutely. I think, we mentioned a minute ago, Kash Patel is one of those more controversial picks. And I think the reception was mixed, to be fair. Again, not every Republican, at least, is outright saying they're not open to this nomination, but there are some who I think are certainly voicing concerns about this pick. As you mentioned, there are some concerns just about the fact that this would mean Chris Wray is being forced out as FBI director. And Chris Wray, we should note, was a Trump appointee who put him in that job in the first place.
And he pushed out James Comey for Chris Wray to be in that position.
Yeah, and certainly I think, the FBI, Trump has always had this distrust in the FBI because of that James Comey relationship that has sort of continued to percolate with Chris Wray. So he clearly is eyeing forcing him out to put in a loyalist in Kash Patel. And certainly I think there are going to be some concerns from certainly Democrats, and I would be surprised if we see any Democrats vote for him as the FBI director, but it'll be interesting to see how many Republicans sort of raise concerns about some of his past comments about targeting Trump enemies, things of that nature. Yeah,
and when we talk about these controversial nominees, it's also a question of how many are these Republican senators willing to shoot down, because as we know, it's pretty controversial to vote no and down one of your president's nominations, so it'll be interesting. Moving out of the House Democrats are getting ready to have their elections for committee chairs, or rather ranking members, because Democrats are going to be the minority. Yesterday, Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, he announced that he was going to be running for the top Democratic spot on the Judiciary Committee, notable because he's now challenging Jerry Nadler, who's been in that seat for about 6 years now in that ranking member position. What's behind these? This challenge? And in the broader scheme of things, it seems like this is another push for a change in generation in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I think this sort of battle for the top spot among Democrats on the Judiciary Committee is representative of that sort of push from some Democrats to have a sort of changing of the guard, and gets at this question of, who is best equipped to handle the sort of hand-to-hand combat sort of politics that we see in the Trump era.
The face of the Trump resistance on Capitol Hill.
Absolutely.
Is the way they're putting it.
Absolutely. And Jamie Raskin, we saw, has been very outspoken. He's been somebody who's been able to sort of deliver these forceful moments, these forceful speeches. Jerry Nadler, of course, presided over, impeachment proceedings the first go-round during the first Trump administration. But he is viewed as sort of the old guard, maybe not as brash or outspoken. And so we're seeing, I think, a push from some Democrats, and some younger Democrats in particular, who would like to see somebody like Jamie Raskin, a new face, somebody who maybe is more ready to, to go to the mat during the incoming Trump administration.
It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Now let's get something on your beat that's been the story of this week. That pardon that President Biden signed for his son, Hunter, well-timed because the president is now in Angola, Africa, so he doesn't have to answer too many questions about this matter. What are you hearing about what went into this decision for Biden to change his mind and pardon his son? He had, of course, and the White House had been saying for months this wouldn't happen. And then I know you have new reporting about how this could impact the president's legacy. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so, I think that was one thing that frustrated Democrats was the fact that he had for months said he wasn't going to do this, and then he did. The other thing that's frustrating Democrats that I think gets at the legacy question is that, Biden ran in 2020 and he presented himself as sort of this return to normalcy, this person who would safeguard institutions, safeguard democracy, respect guardrails, respect the independence of the Justice Department. And he stressed that throughout his son's sort of legal proceedings was that he wasn't going to intervene in these cases. He was going to let the judicial process play out. And so I think there is this feeling among some Democrats and even some sort of moderate Republicans who respected Biden that he's sort of pulling the rug out from under them by going back and saying he's pardoning his son, that this case was infected with politics, as he put it in a statement. Some people have said that sounds sort of Trumpy almost, to say that the Justice Department was, biased against his son. Now, there are some who argue that if Hunter Biden's name was not Hunter Biden, he wouldn't have faced these gun charges in particular. But certainly I think that gets at the legacy question that folks just feel like for a man who presented himself as a sort of protector of norms and a return to normalcy, that this is sort of going back on that word.
Yeah, no, it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out in the history books. Brett Samuels, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.
President-elect Trump is doubling down on a campaign promise he made earlier this year, vowing to block Japanese company Nippon Steel from acquiring U.S. steel. Trump wrote in a Truth Social post on Monday that he is, quote, totally against the buyout. Nippon announced the nearly $15 billion deal to buy U.S. steel last year, to much criticism from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, in addition to the Steelworkers Union. Back in September, Nippon asked to refile its acquisition bid, postponing approval until after the election. President Biden has signaled that his administration would also block the acquisition. And shifting gears now, billionaire and the leader of the newly established Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, has once again been denied a record-breaking multi-billion-dollar pay package for serving as Tesla CEO. A Delaware judge denied the $101 billion package made up of over 300 million Tesla stock options. This is the second time that this particular package was thrown out, despite it being approved by a majority of his shareholders. In her decision, the judge in the case agreed with the argument that Musk was too close to the board. She also noted that Musk admitted he, quote, negotiated against himself regarding his own compensation. The judge said the massive payday was not in the best interest of the company, saying that while he deserved to be compensated, the ultimate award was not fair to shareholders. And we'll be right back with more of your Daily Debrief.